I used to love Sunday mornings in my parents' house. The smell of coffee, the sunlight dancing through lace curtains, my mother humming some half-forgotten tune as she flipped through old photo albums. It used to feel safe, like the world outside couldn't touch us here. But that morning was different. The air felt heavy, still, like the moment before a storm breaks. I sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through my banking app, waiting for the transfer to complete. Mortgage due, utilities overdue, all familiar notifications by now. I told myself I didn't mind, that this was what family did for each other. The toast in the toaster burned. My mother didn't notice. My father's newspaper lay folded neatly beside his mug. The routine should have comforted me, but instead it made me feel invisible. Dad, I started softly. I just transferred the mortgage payment, but I think next month we should— He didn't look up. He just said it, so casually, so precisely, that for a second, I thought I misheard him. You're not family anymore. Emma, you're just the one who pays the mortgage. The words fell like shattered glass across the table. My hand froze midair. The smell of burnt toast thickened, filling the silence between us. My mother didn't even glance at me. She tore another piece of bread, dipped it in her tea, and said nothing. Excuse me? My voice came out small, brittle. Dad finally met my eyes. His face was calm, too calm. You heard me. You're always reminding us what you pay for. Maybe it's time you accept that's all you are to this family. Our provider. Provider. The word hit harder than any insult, because it wasn't even anger. It was dismissal. Cold, calculated dismissal from the people I thought I was saving. For years, I'd stretched myself thin to keep them afloat. I'd worked weekends, skipped vacations, lived in a cramped apartment so they could stay in their house. Our house, I thought. I told myself I was being a good daughter, repaying all they'd done for me. But in that moment, all those memories, birthdays spent in their living room, nights I cried after long shifts, dissolved into something grotesque. I wasn't their daughter anymore. I was an ATM with a pulse. My throat tightened. So, is that what you really think of me? My mother finally looked up then, only for a second. Her face was unreadable, her voice flat. Don't be dramatic, Emma. You always take things so personally. I laughed, quietly at first, then louder, until it turned into something closer to a sob. Personally? You just told me I'm not part of this family. Dad folded his newspaper with a sigh, as if I were a noisy neighbor interrupting his peace. You're twisting my words again. That attitude of yours is why you'll always be alone. That line, always be alone. It wasn't the first time I'd heard it, but this time it didn't cut. It cauterized. Something in me went very still. I looked around that kitchen. The same kitchen where I once made my first school project, where my mom used to braid my hair, where I thought love lived. The wallpaper was peeling near the sink. The refrigerator hummed with a familiar rattle, and yet everything felt foreign, like stepping into a house built from someone else's memories. My gaze fell on the stack of unpaid bills near the microwave. My handwriting on every envelope, every signature were mine. I picked up my purse from the chair, my hands trembling only slightly. Where are you going? My mother asked, her tone exasperated, not worried. Out, I said simply. Don't be dramatic, she repeated, the words like a tired refrain. I turned to her then, really looked at her. The woman who taught me to say sorry even when I wasn't wrong, who convinced me that love and obligation were the same thing. For years I believed her. Not anymore. I'm not being dramatic, I said softly. I'm just done. The room went quiet again. Even the refrigerator stopped humming for a moment, as if the house itself was listening. Outside, sunlight flooded through the open door, almost too bright, almost mocking. I stepped into it anyway. My phone buzzed, a calendar alert reminding me of the next mortgage payment. Another text from my manager asking if I could cover someone's shift. Notifications, responsibilities, expectations. They all blurred together until they felt meaningless. I stood by my car, keys in hand, and stared at the house I'd been trying so hard to keep standing. It looked smaller than I remembered, like a shell of something that used to be alive. A question surfaced quietly in my mind. Dangerous, thrilling. What would happen if I just stopped paying? For a second, the thought scared me. The next, it set me free. I got in my car, closed the door, and started the engine. My reflection in the rearview mirror looked different. Not stronger yet, but awake. As I drove away, the house disappeared in the mirror, swallowed by sunlight and distance. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just breathed, for the first time in years. And beneath the weight of that breath, something inside me shifted. Not rage. Not grief. Something quieter, more dangerous. Clarity. They say we learn what love is by watching our parents. If that's true, then I learned that love was something you earned, by sacrifice, obedience, and silence. I was 21 when my parents lost their business. My father's voice, usually booming with pride, had cracked over the phone that night. My mother said, "We just need a little help until we get back on our feet." I was finishing my senior year of college, my final semester before graduation, and had a scholarship that covered everything. I had dreams of traveling, maybe teaching abroad. But when I heard the desperation in my mother's voice, I folded those dreams neatly and put them away. "Family comes first," she told me. Those 3 words were supposed to sound noble, but they became the quiet chain around my neck. Within a week, I withdrew from school and took a full-time job at a small accounting firm. I told myself it was temporary, a few months to help them stabilize. But months became years. The first time I sent money home, my mother cried. She called me her angel. My father said, "You've made us proud, sweetheart." That night I cried too, not out of regret, but out of relief. I felt useful, needed, seen. It's strange, looking back now, how easily love and control can blur together. At first, helping them made me feel strong. Like I was holding the family together with my bare hands. When they couldn't afford the mortgage, I paid it. When the car broke down, I covered the repairs. When my younger brother dropped out of college, I helped pay for his new apartment. Every problem, every crisis, I became the solution. And for a long time, I believed that made me special. At family gatherings, my parents would boast. "Our daughter takes care of us," my father would say proudly, clapping me on the shoulder. "She's so responsible." My mother would smile, glass of wine in hand, and add, "We're so blessed to have her." Everyone would nod, impressed. No one saw how their compliments sank into me like tiny hooks, anchoring me deeper into a role I never agreed to play. Behind closed doors, the tone was different. Whenever I hesitated to send money, my father's voice hardened. "You think we didn't sacrifice for you, after everything we've done?" And my mother, she didn't yell. She sighed. "We just thought you'd want to help, dear. You know how much we've struggled." Guilt is a quiet language, and I became fluent. I learned to budget my emotions the way I budgeted my salary. I learned that thank you often meant you can do more. By the time I was 30, I'd climbed the corporate ladder, assistant accountant to senior analyst. My colleagues celebrated my promotions with champagne. I celebrated by transferring more money to my parents. When my friends invited me to dinners or weekend trips, I declined, saying I couldn't afford it. In truth, I could. I just didn't have permission. Not from my finances, and not from my conscience. Love had turned into a balance sheet, and I was always in debt. I remember once, years ago, a man I was dating, David, took me out to dinner. He was kind, soft-spoken, with eyes that looked at me like I was a person, not a role. We'd been seeing each other for almost a year. That night, he reached across the table, took my hand, and said quietly, "Emma, when do you get to live your life?" I smiled to cover the ache. "I'm fine," I told him. "I like helping them," but he saw through it. "That's not help, Emma. That's survival." We broke up a few months later. He said he couldn't compete with the weight I carried home from my parents' house. I didn't blame him. How could I when I couldn't even compete with it myself? After that, I buried myself in work. My coworkers called me reliable. My boss once said I was the kind of woman who had it all together. They didn't know that my idea of together meant holding everyone else up until my hands bled. Over time, I stopped buying new clothes. I stopped celebrating birthdays. I stopped thinking about things I wanted. Even the scent of my mother's perfume, a sharp lavender she wore daily, began to make my stomach twist. Because it reminded me of obligation. There were moments, tiny ones, when I almost saw it, the truth beneath the guilt. Like the day I bought my father a new watch for his birthday. I'd spent half my bonus on it, wanting to surprise him. He unwrapped it, smiled, then said, "You shouldn't have spent so much, but since you did, maybe next year you can help your brother get a car." Or the night my mother told me with a soft laugh, "You're lucky we let you feel needed. Not every daughter gets to be this close to her parents." At the time, I thought she meant it affectionately. Now I realize it was a confession. I'd been raised to equate usefulness with love, and in their world, love had conditions. Even now, the memory of that kitchen morning haunts me. My father's voice, my mother's silence. But in truth, that sentence wasn't born that day. It was years in the making. Every sigh, every guilt-ridden phone call, every manipulation disguised as gratitude. It was all leading there. "You're not family anymore," he said. But hadn't they stopped treating me like family long before that? I replayed old moments in my mind like a film on loop. My 25th birthday, they forgot. My 32nd, they remembered, only because they needed help paying property taxes. Every milestone in my life was measured by how much I could give, not how much I could be. And still, I stayed. Because leaving them felt like betrayal. Because their happiness was the currency I paid to feel loved. Sometimes, I think back to that little girl I used to be. The one who stayed up late making birthday cards for her parents. Who believed that family comes first was a promise. Not a prison. She didn't know any better. She thought love meant never saying no. Now I do. But knowing the truth doesn't undo the years of conditioning. It doesn't erase the reflex to apologize for wanting peace. It doesn't quiet the echo of my father's voice in my mind, reminding me of everything I supposedly owe. Still, something in me shifted that day in the kitchen, like the final piece of a puzzle snapping into place. For the first time, I wasn't angry at them. I was angry at myself for letting it go on so long, for mistaking dependence for devotion. And as I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, I finally admitted the thought I'd buried for years. If I wanted to be free, I'd have to stop being their daughter. Not by name, but by duty. The call came on a Tuesday, a day so ordinary it almost mocked her. Emma had been halfway through reviewing a quarterly report when her phone lit up with an unknown number. The voice on the other end was polite, professional, and utterly unaware that it was about to shatter her world. "Ms. Green, this is Dana from Wells Ridge Bank. We're just confirming your authorization on the refinancing of the property at 182 Willow Lane." Emma frowned. "I'm sorry, what?" "The refinancing," the woman repeated, tapping keys in the background. "The one processed last week under your name. We just need to verify some signature details before we finalize." There was a pause, long enough for Emma's pen to slip from her hand and clatter across the desk. Her mind emptied, replaced by a dull roar of confusion. "My name?" she managed to whisper. "No, there's a mistake. I didn't sign anything." The woman hesitated, a crack in her professional rhythm. "It shows here your co-ownership was part of the collateral documentation. Maybe your co-borrowers, Richard and Helen Green, handled the paperwork?" Emma's throat went dry. "Those are my parents." Another pause. Then, gently, the banker said, "Perhaps speak with them first. We'll hold the process for 72 hours. She didn't remember leaving the office. One moment she was staring at spreadsheets. The next she was on the freeway, her pulse matching the rhythmic thud of her tires. The drive to Willow Lane felt endless, every familiar turn now heavy with dread. By the time she parked in front of her parents' house, her hands were trembling so badly she could barely turn off the ignition. The home looked the same. The white shutters she'd helped repaint last summer, the flower bed her mother always bragged about, the porch swing where she once drank lemonade as a child. But today it looked staged, like a memory wearing someone else's skin. Inside, the air smelled faintly of coffee and old carpet cleaner. Her father was in his armchair reading the paper. Her mother hummed in the kitchen, rinsing dishes. "Hey, sweetheart, Helen called without looking up. "You're early today?" Emma stood in the doorway holding the printed email from the bank, her voice trembling. "Why did the bank call me about refinancing the house?" The hum of the faucet stopped. Her mother's shoulders stiffened. Her father folded the newspaper slowly, eyes flicking up over the rim of his glasses. That? Emma's voice cracked. "Dad, they said my name's on the paperwork." "You used my credit," Richard sighed. The sound of inconvenience, not guilt. Emma, calm down. "It's just business. The rates were better this quarter, and the loan rep said it would be faster to process under your record. You've got the best credit score." Emma's chest tightened. "Without even telling me?" Her mother finally turned, dish towel in hand, as if this were a small misunderstanding over dinner plans. "Sweetheart, don't make a scene. It's family. We all help each other." "Help?" Emma's voice trembled. "This isn't help. This is fraud." Helen rolled her eyes, a look Emma had seen too many times. "You're being ungrateful again, after everything we've done for you." That phrase, those 5 words, a blade disguised as love. Emma felt something inside her fracture. All the years of swallowed protests, the quiet acceptance, the endless giving, it all condensed into a single shaking breath. "You used my name. You risked my future." Her father stood now, his calm veneer cracking. "Watch your tone. We didn't risk anything. We just made a decision as a family." "No," Emma whispered. "You made a decision for me. You've been doing that my whole life." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the hum of the refrigerator felt distant. Richard's expression hardened, his jaw set. "You owe us everything you have. If it weren't for us, you wouldn't even have the chance to build a career to—" Emma's hand shook as she held up the papers. "To what? Spend every paycheck bailing you out? You call that gratitude?" Her mother crossed her arms, defensive now. "You're being dramatic. We just needed a little help. It's not like you'll miss it. You make good money." The words hit harder than any scream could. Emma felt the air leave her lungs. She saw it all at once. The years of control disguised as care, the guilt carefully woven into compliments. Every "we're proud of you" was really "don't stop providing." "I can't do this anymore," she said, her voice trembling but clear. Richard scoffed. "Don't be childish. You'll thank us later when the house appreciates in value." She took a step back. "No, I won't." He raised his voice, for the first time in years, sharp and cold. "You owe us everything." The words echoed through the room like a gunshot, and just like that, something broke. She didn't remember the rest in full. Only flashes. Her mother's sighs turning into scolding, her father's voice chasing her down the hallway, the slam of the front door behind her. By the time she got back to her apartment, her vision blurred with tears, the papers were crumpled in her hands. That night, she opened every shared account and started withdrawing her portion. The numbers blurred on the screen. She packed boxes in silence, not methodically, but as if moving was the only way to stay upright. Every photo, every object she touched carried a memory, a version of her that believed love meant sacrifice. The framed picture of her parents at her college graduation, the thank you card her brother sent years ago with "You're the best, sis," scrawled in lazy handwriting, the mortgage envelope still unopened, mocking her from the counter. By midnight, her apartment looked like a crime scene of her old life. She booked a motel an hour away, left the keys on the counter, and drove through the empty streets. The motel room smelled of bleach and loneliness. She dropped her bags on the bed, turned off her phone, and finally, let herself fall apart. The sobs came in waves, years of exhaustion crashing through her chest. She cried for the little girl who learned to say yes to everything, for the teenager who thought love was something to earn, for the woman who mistook being needed for being valued. But under the grief, faint and fragile, something stirred, the first quiet flicker of freedom. She didn't owe anyone anymore. Not the mortgage, not the debt, not the invisible chains of family first. It felt like death, but maybe it was something else. Maybe it was rebirth. At dawn, she stood by the motel window, watching sunlight spill over the horizon. Her face was swollen, her eyes red, but her reflection looked lighter. In the silence, she whispered the words that had never come before. "I don't owe you." It wasn't anger. It wasn't defiance. It was truth, and it was hers alone. For the first time in her life, Emma Green didn't feel needed. She felt free. The first night in her new apartment, Emma couldn't sleep. The place was smaller than any she'd ever lived in. A single bedroom with chipped paint and a stubborn radiator that clanged like a heartbeat out of rhythm. The air smelled faintly of dust and old coffee. She had one suitcase, a folding chair, and a mattress she'd ordered online that hadn't yet arrived. And yet, despite the discomfort, the silence was astonishing. For years, silence had meant something was wrong. A pause before another request, another guilt-laced favor. But now it was just quiet. No voices echoing from the next room. No phone buzzing at midnight. Just the faint hum of the streetlight filtering through the blinds and her own breath, steady and free. She lay on the floor, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the cracked ceiling. The stillness felt foreign, almost guilty, as if peace was something she hadn't earned. But beneath the guilt, something inside her exhaled for the first time in years. The days began to take on shape. In the mornings, she'd walk to a small cafe near the bus stop. The barista learned her order by the end of the week. Black coffee, oat milk, no sugar. At work, she kept her head down, quietly rebuilding her savings. Each paycheck felt like reclaiming a fragment of herself. At night, she cooked for one. The first few dinners were burnt, flavorless attempts. Too much salt, too little patience. But she learned. She learned how to season slowly, how to measure not by precision, but by taste. She laughed once, realizing she had never actually cooked for herself before. Not truly. Every meal used to be rushed, dictated by someone else's hunger. Now she ate when she wanted, stopped when she was full. It was a small thing, but it felt like sovereignty. The guilt didn't fade easily. Sometimes she'd wake at 2 a.m. and reach for her phone out of habit, half expecting a text from her mother. "Can you send money for the car?" Or her father, "Call the bank. They won't talk to me without you." Instead, she'd see missed calls and voicemails. The messages alternated between pleading and rage. "Emma, we need to talk. This is getting ridiculous. You're really going to abandon your own parents? We didn't raise you to be so heartless. You'll regret this one day." Each message was a hook, a reminder of the role she'd played for decades. But she didn't respond. At first, the silence felt like cruelty. Then it became discipline. And eventually, it became strength. Months passed, and the world around her softened. She started journaling again, not out of obligation, but to listen to herself. Her first entry was just a line. "I don't know who I am when I'm not saving someone." The pages filled slowly. Quiet realizations, fragments of memory, questions with no answers. Some nights she'd write until dawn, tracing the outline of her own rediscovery. On weekends, she walked the trails by the lake. She liked the way her footsteps crunched on gravel, the way the air smelled different depending on the season. She didn't listen to music, didn't check her phone. She just existed. And one Saturday morning, she passed a community center with a sign taped to the door. "Beginner's art class. Saturdays at 10. No experience required." She hesitated. It felt indulgent, almost wrong, to do something just because she wanted to. But that afternoon, she found herself sitting at a paint-streaked table surrounded by strangers, retirees, students, a mother and her teenage son. When the instructor handed her a brush, she froze for a moment, then smiled. The first stroke of paint was uneven, awkward, but something loosened in her chest. She wasn't painting for approval. She wasn't doing it for anyone else. By the third class, she began to laugh more. By the fifth, she stayed late just to clean brushes and chat with the others. One day, a stranger at the library, a man with kind eyes and a stack of novels under his arm, told her, "You look lighter these days." She didn't realize until later that it was true. Still, the fear never fully left. Every time a letter from the bank arrived, her stomach clenched. She'd stare at the envelope for hours before opening it, half expecting disaster. One Friday it came, the call she'd been dreading. "Ms. Green? This is Dana again, from Wellsridge. We're contacting you about the Willow Lane property." Emma's pulse quickened. For a second, she was back in that moment. The panic, the helplessness. But she took a deep breath and said evenly, "Yes, I've been expecting your call." The woman hesitated. "The account has fallen behind on payments. We wanted to confirm your involvement before proceeding." "I'm not involved anymore," Emma said. Her tone was calm, almost detached. "My parents acted without consent. I've already submitted the fraud affidavit and supporting documents. You should have them on file." A pause. Papers shuffled. Then, "Yes, I see them. Everything appears in order. Thank you for clarifying." When the call ended, Emma set the phone down and stared at her reflection in the window. She didn't cry. She didn't shake. For the first time, she had handled chaos without falling apart. Winter came, and her apartment grew colder, but she didn't mind. She wore thick socks and filled the space with secondhand furniture. A mismatched lamp, a wobbly bookshelf, a thrifted armchair by the window. It wasn't much, but it was hers. She started hanging her own paintings on the walls. Imperfect, messy, alive. Her parents still called occasionally, though less and less. Their anger had cooled into silence. Once her brother texted her, "Mom says you've changed." She didn't reply, because she had. The woman she used to be, the dutiful daughter, the provider, the peacekeeper, had vanished somewhere between those long walks and quiet mornings. What remained was someone quieter, yes, but stronger. Someone learning that peace isn't the absence of conflict. It's the absence of permission for others to define your worth. One night, nearly a year after she'd left, Emma sat by the window with a cup of tea, watching the snow fall. The city outside was hushed, blanketed in white. She thought of her old house, of the porch swing, the laughter that had never felt real, the hollow warmth of obligation. She wasn't angry anymore, just sad. The kind of sadness that sits beside forgiveness, but never quite touches it. She picked up her journal and wrote, "Maybe freedom doesn't start with joy. Maybe it starts with quiet." She closed the notebook, exhaled and smiled. Small but genuine. For the first time in her life, she wasn't waiting for permission to rest. She wasn't waiting for approval or affection or proof that she was enough. She simply was. And in the stillness of that small apartment, with the snow falling softly outside, Emma Green began to live, quietly, freely, on her own terms. The letter arrived on a Thursday. It was thick, heavier than usual, with the bank's seal pressed into the corner like a bruise. Emma had come to recognize that insignia, the way soldiers recognized an enemy's flag. Still, she opened it, her hands steady this time. Inside, notice of foreclosure. The property listed was the same one she'd grown up in. The house with the creaking front step, the hydrangeas her mother never watered, the faded porch swing where her father used to read the paper. Only now, it was being repossessed. And her name, was still listed as a co-borrower. Once, that would have sent her spiraling. Panic, guilt, desperation to fix it. But this time, something inside her stayed still. She read every word slowly, methodically. The numbers didn't scare her. They were simply data, proof of a story she already knew by heart. Then she set the papers aside, opened her laptop, and searched for a lawyer. Her first meeting with Nadia Patel took place in a minimalist office above a florist shop. The air smelled faintly of jasmine and printer ink. Nadia was composed, elegant, with a kind of quiet authority that made Emma feel instantly safe. As Emma explained everything, the forged loan documents, the co-signed mortgages, the years of unpaid debt, Nadia took notes without interrupting. Occasionally, she'd look up and ask a precise question. Did you authorize this transfer? Do you have proof of the original agreement? Emma brought folders, receipts, bank statements. She had kept everything, not out of foresight, but out of habit. It had once been her role to organize her parents' chaos. Now it was evidence. When she finished, Nadia closed her notebook and said calmly, "You've been financially abused, Emma. This isn't family conflict. It's exploitation." The word hung in the air like truth finally spoken aloud. For a long moment, Emma couldn't breathe. I let them," she whispered. "I thought it was love." Nadia's gaze softened. "You were conditioned to think that way. It's what happens when loyalty is used as leverage." She slid a form across the desk. "Sign this and I'll start the process of separating your liability from theirs. You have every right to walk away." Emma stared at the pen. It felt heavier than it should. Then, with a single motion, she signed her name, reclaiming it, one stroke at a time. The following weeks were grueling. Every day brought new discoveries, accounts she didn't know existed, withdrawals she never approved, her parents' signatures forged in her handwriting. She'd sit at her small kitchen table, papers spread around her like battlefield maps. Every document was another betrayal, another layer of deceit. At night, she'd lie awake replaying their words. Families help each other. You owe us everything. Don't be dramatic. But now those phrases sounded different, not sacred, but scripted. The language of control disguised as care. Each revelation stripped away a piece of her guilt and replaced it with clarity. Her parents called relentlessly once the foreclosure became real. Her mother's voice shook with performative fragility. "Emma, please, they're taking the house. We have nowhere to go." Emma took a slow breath. "You had choices," she said quietly. "I'm making mine. You can't turn your back on us," her father snapped during another call. "We're your blood," she almost laughed. "Blood doesn't entitle you to my life." Then she hung up. The silence that followed wasn't painful anymore. It was clean. In her spare time, Emma began volunteering at a local women's resource center. It started small, one evening a week, teaching basic budgeting to women recently divorced or leaving abusive relationships. The first night, she almost didn't go. She still doubted she had anything to offer. But when one woman admitted she didn't even know how to check her credit report, Emma recognized that same fear she had once lived with. The fear of not knowing where your own name began and someone else's ended. She stayed late that night, answering questions, drawing simple diagrams. By the end of the month, the center coordinator asked if she'd consider leading a regular workshop. Emma said yes. She began calling it the Audit of Love and Debt. Her first slide read, "Love without respect is just dependency. And dependency without consent is control." Every session left her feeling lighter. She wasn't just untangling her past. She was helping others untangle theirs. The act of teaching became her healing. One afternoon, Nadia called. "I have good news," she said, her voice calm but carrying warmth. "The bank accepted your affidavit. Your name is officially cleared from the mortgage and all associated debt." Emma blinked, sitting down slowly. "So, it's over?" "It's over," Nadia confirmed. Then softer. "You did the hard part, you know. You chose yourself." Emma smiled, the kind of smile that starts in the chest and rises slowly. "Thank you, Nadia, for everything." "Don't thank me," the lawyer said. "Go live like you mean it." Later that evening, Emma stood by her window again, the city washed in gold light. On her desk sat the final document from the bank, a release of liability, embossed and official. She touched the paper lightly, as though confirming it was real. That night, she poured herself a glass of wine and lit a candle. It wasn't a celebration. It was a ritual. Quiet. Intentional. She picked up the old keychain her parents had given her when she first started paying their mortgage. A small metal house, engraved with home, is where the heart is. She turned it over in her palm for a long moment, then set it in a drawer and closed it. Her heart had never been in that house. It was here now, with her. Months passed. Spring came early. Emma's life settled into a rhythm she'd never known. Mornings spent running by the river, afternoons at work, evenings volunteering. She'd started painting again, her canvases now bursting with color instead of muted grays. One day, after class, an older woman named Ruth approached her. "You speak like someone who's forgiven them," Ruth said gently. Emma paused. "I don't think forgiveness is the right word." Ruth tilted her head. "Then what is?" Emma thought for a moment. "I think it's understanding without letting them back in." Ruth smiled knowingly. "That's more powerful than forgiveness." In quiet moments, Emma would think of Nadia, the way she'd said, "You're not abandoning them. You're ending abuse." Those words had become a mantra. She used to believe power came from control, holding everything together, paying every bill, fixing every crisis. Now she understood that real power was in release. She no longer needed to prove her worth through sacrifice. When her parents' final voicemail came, a brief, bitter message about ungrateful children, she listened to it once, then deleted it. No tears, no shaking hands, just quiet certainty. Their words no longer defined her. By midsummer, her case was fully closed. She met Nadia one last time at the office to sign the final papers. As they finished, Nadia smiled faintly. "Do you realize," she said, "you've turned what they used against you, money, debt, dependence, into your freedom?" Emma laughed softly. "Ironic, isn't it?" "It's poetic," Nadia said. Outside, the city buzzed with life. The scent of jasmine from the florist below drifted through the open window. Emma stepped onto the sidewalk, sunlight glinting off car windows, and breathed in deeply. For the first time, she didn't feel haunted by the past. She didn't feel bound by guilt or fear. She felt clean. She had performed her final audit, not of numbers, but of love itself, and found the balance at last. Love, without respect, had left her bankrupt. But self-respect had made her rich again, and as she walked away, head high, she knew. The next time someone asked where home was, she'd say, "Anywhere I don't have to earn my worth." The house looked smaller now. It wasn't the towering monument of her childhood anymore, the place where birthdays blurred with bruised silences, where every door slammed a little too loud. It stood hollow, stripped of its pretense, its paint faded and its garden gone to weeds. A foreclosure sign leaned crookedly in the yard like a headstone for something long dead. Emma parked across the street and sat still for a long time, her hands resting on the steering wheel. The Camry hummed softly beneath her, the only steady thing in a world that had collapsed and reassembled itself into something sharper, truer. She took a breath and stepped out. The gravel crunched under her shoes. The same sound she'd heard as a teenager sneaking in late after her night shifts. Terrified her father would notice the missing gas money. But now there was no fear, only a quiet resolve that settled in her chest like armor. Inside, the house was nearly empty. The furniture had been sold off or repossessed. The air was thick with the faint smell of dust and old disappointment. Her parents were waiting at the kitchen table, the same table where she'd done her homework, where her mother used to press her hand down on unpaid bills as if sheer will could erase them. Her mother's face was drawn, eyes rimmed red. Her father looked older, the confident man who used to call himself provider now sagging in defeat. "You came," her mother said flatly. Emma nodded, setting her bag on the counter. "The bank called," she said. "They told me the house is officially foreclosed." Her father's jaw tightened. "You could have helped," he muttered. "I did," she replied quietly. "For years," her mother's voice cracked like brittle glass. "You ruined us, Emma." The words hung in the air, fragile and cruel. Emma looked at her, really looked. For years, she'd tried to find the softness in her mother's eyes, the ones she'd imagined must be buried under exhaustion or pride. But now all she saw was the reflection of a woman who couldn't stand her own choices. She reached into her bag and pulled out a neatly stacked folder. Documents, bank statements, forged signatures. She placed them on the table between them. "No," she said softly, her voice steady. "You ruined me first." Her father gave a sharp, humorless laugh. "Listen to you, acting like some kind of victim. We raised you. We put food on your table. You owe us everything." Emma tilted her head slightly, almost curious. "Do I?" He leaned forward, the same way he used to when lecturing her for not picking up extra shifts. "We gave you a life. You took it back," she said simply. "Every time you used my name, every loan, every lie. You didn't just take money, Dad. You took my future." Silence stretched between them, brittle and electric. Her mother crossed her arms, eyes glinting with cold indignation. "Families help each other," she said. "That's what love means." Emma smiled faintly, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "Then maybe I don't want that kind of love anymore." Her father's hand slammed against the table, the echo cutting through the empty room. "You're ungrateful." "For surviving?" she asked, voice trembling only slightly. "For trying to build something that isn't made of debt and guilt?" He stared at her, mouth opening, then closing again. He looked like he wanted to shout. But the weight of what she held in those papers stopped him. Every forged document, every transaction, every betrayal laid bare. Emma stood, her chair scraping softly against the floor. She didn't need to raise her voice. The truth was louder than anything she could say. "I'm not here to punish you," she said. "I'm here to end this." Her mother's lip trembled. "You'd let your own parents lose their home?" Emma met her gaze, calm, clear, and heartbreakingly steady. "You already lost me," she said. "This house is just the evidence." Her father slumped back in his chair, eyes darting toward the foreclosure notice pinned on the counter. For the first time, he didn't look angry. He looked small. "You'll regret this," he muttered. Emma shook her head gently. "No. I've spent my entire life regretting what I didn't do, what I let you take. This time, I'm choosing myself." She reached into her pocket and pulled out the house keys, heavy, familiar, the same set she'd carried since she was 16. She looked down at them, then placed them on the table beside the documents. "I paid for this house with my soul," she said softly. "Now it's time I buy my peace." Her father said nothing. Her mother turned away, pressing her palms to her face, her shoulders shaking. Whether from sorrow or anger, Emma couldn't tell. She looked around the kitchen one last time. The sunlight slanted through the half-broken blinds, casting stripes of gold and shadow across the faded linoleum. Every corner of this house held a ghost. Her childhood laughter, her teenage tears, her adult exhaustion, and now, finally, her goodbye. She walked toward the door. "Emma," her mother's voice called faintly. "If you leave now, don't come back." Emma paused, her hand on the doorframe. She turned just enough to meet her mother's eyes. "I won't," she said simply, and she meant it. Outside, the air was cool, carrying the faint scent of rain. The wind tugged at her hair as she stepped onto the cracked driveway. She glanced back once, at the house, at the sagging roof, at the life she'd finally outgrown. Then she walked to her car. When she opened the door, a wave of calm washed over her. The keys she'd just left behind weren't a loss. They were a release. As she started the engine, sunlight spilled across the dashboard. She rolled the windows down and let the wind rush in. For the first time in years, she wasn't driving toward something. She was driving away, and that was enough. The road stretched ahead, endless and open. She didn't know exactly where she was going. Maybe to the next town, maybe to nowhere. But as the house disappeared in the rearview mirror, she felt the weight she'd carried for a lifetime begin to lift. She drove until the ache in her chest softened, until the sky turned a deep violet and the first stars began to bloom. When she finally pulled over by the roadside, the horizon glowing faintly gold, she whispered into the quiet, "I'm free." Voiceover, closing reflection. Sometimes justice isn't about punishment. It's about finally refusing to pay the price for someone else's mistakes. Forgiveness isn't always peace. Sometimes it's silence. Sometimes it's walking away. And sometimes it's dropping the keys and never looking back. Soft piano music fades in. The camera lingers on the car as it moves down the road, sunlight spilling through the windows. The wind ripples her hair. Her face isn't triumphant, it's peaceful. The road bends and she disappears into the light, free at last.